The Gornoth were a name that sent shivers through the spines of every species in the galaxy. They weren't just feared, they were a force of nature. Towering in stature, their skin as tough as reinforced steel, and their minds honed by centuries of warfare, the Gornoth were known for one thing above all: conquest. They had marched across star systems, leaving a trail of devastation in their wake. Civilizations that stood against them either fell to their knees or were obliterated entirely. For millennia, they had remained undefeated, their war fleets and ground troops unrivaled in both strength and brutality. Their empire stretched across the galaxy, and any planet within their reach was subjected to their dominion. Their entire existence revolved around war and dominance. It was not just a way of life for them, it was a purpose, an unshakable belief that they were destined to rule. But in recent years, the Gornoth had faced a problem. Their wars had left no opponents strong enough to challenge them. They had crushed every species that dared to resist, and their empire was growing bored. There was no longer any thrill in fighting lesser beings who posed no real threat. Their society, built on the constant hunger for battle, grew restless. The Council of Warlords, the ruling body of the Gornoth, began to search for a new target, one that could satiate their thirst for a real war. Reports from distant sectors brought the Gornoth's attention to a small, blue planet. Earth. A planet inhabited by humans, a species that had only recently emerged into the galactic arena. The Gornoth had little reason to take humans seriously at first. Physically, humans were weak compared to many other species. They lacked the sheer size and strength of the Gornoth, and technologically, they were behind. Yet there was something about humanity that intrigued the Gornoth Council. Rumors spread of humanity's resilience, their ability to survive in situations where other species would have crumbled. These rumors, however, were seen as nothing more than curiosity by the Gornoth. Humans, to them, were insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Perhaps they were more tenacious than expected, but in the eyes of the Gornoth, that would only make their defeat more satisfying. The Council of Warlords viewed Earth as an easy target, a chance to remind the galaxy why the Gornoth were the supreme rulers. After all, who were the humans to challenge a species that had never known defeat? Earth's reputation in the galaxy was modest at best. Humanity had managed to carve out a small niche for themselves, establishing diplomatic relations with a few neighboring systems. They were respected, but not feared. No one saw them as a galactic power, and certainly not one that could stand against the likes of the Gornoth. Humanity had survived by using their wits and resourcefulness. They had endured minor skirmishes, disputes with other species that tested their resolve, but none of these conflicts had prepared them for what was coming. The Gornoth were not just another species looking for territory. They were a machine of war, a relentless force that had crushed far greater powers than Earth could ever hope to be. The Gornoth had grown tired of waiting. Their Council of Warlords convened, and the decision was made. Earth would be the next target of their war machine. They broadcasted their intentions to the entire galaxy, making it clear that the Gornoth were coming for humanity. There was no negotiation, no diplomacy. The message was simple: surrender or be destroyed. The galaxy watched with bated breath, knowing what had happened to the countless civilizations that had faced the Gornoth before. Most assumed Earth would be another casualty, another planet to be erased from existence. For the Gornoth, this was just another conquest. They didn't expect a real fight. Humanity, in their eyes, was nothing more than a stepping stone to greater victories. They would crush Earth, and in doing so, remind the galaxy of their supremacy. On Earth, the declaration of war sent shockwaves through every corner of society. The humans knew what the Gornoth were capable of. They had heard the stories, seen the wreckage left behind by the Gornoth's unstoppable war machine. But despite the fear and uncertainty that spread across the planet, there was something else stirring. Humans, for all their flaws, had never been ones to simply roll over and accept defeat. They had faced extinction many times before, from natural disasters to their own wars, and each time, they had found a way to survive. The Gornoth had unknowingly sparked something in humanity that they were not prepared for. They had assumed that their declaration of war would strike fear into the hearts of humans, but they underestimated their resolve. The people of Earth, though vastly outmatched in strength and technology, were not about to surrender. They knew the odds were against them, but they also knew one thing that the Gornoth had yet to learn: humanity had never been about brute strength. Their true power lay in their ability to adapt, to outthink their enemies, and to rise when others expected them to fall. As the Gornoth prepared their fleets for the assault on Earth, humanity quietly prepared for a fight they knew they could not afford to lose. The galaxy, watching from the sidelines, expected a swift and brutal end to the conflict. The Gornoth, after all, had never been defeated, and Earth was but a small, insignificant planet. But humanity was about to teach the galaxy's strongest species a lesson they would never forget. A lesson in history, forged by centuries of survival, and written in the blood of those who had dared to challenge them. The Gornoth believed they were the ultimate rulers, but they had no idea what kind of opponent they had just awakened. The Gornoth fleet, armed with their advanced technology and overwhelming firepower, began their march toward Earth. They anticipated a quick and easy victory, a mere formality to satisfy their hunger for war. However, humanity's response wasn't what they expected. Earth's leaders didn't react with panic, nor did they rush to engage in a traditional battle. Instead, they gathered their best minds, military strategists, scientists, and leaders, realizing that brute force alone wouldn't save them. The human general tasked with Earth's defense was a seasoned strategist, known for his unconventional thinking. He understood that the Gornoth's arrogance would be their weakness. They expected humans to fight the way other species had fought before, directly, head-on, and without much creativity. But humanity's history was rich with lessons of how underdogs had triumphed over seemingly invincible enemies. The general made it clear from the outset, they wouldn't win by playing the Gornoth's game. Instead of meeting the Gornoth in space with their smaller, less advanced fleet, humanity adopted a strategy of hit-and-run tactics. They harassed the massive Gornoth ships, using smaller, faster vessels to disrupt supply lines and communications. These guerrilla tactics began to frustrate the Gornoth commanders, who were unused to dealing with such unpredictable maneuvers. They expected to engage in glorious, large-scale battles, but humanity denied them that satisfaction. As the Gornoth war machine advanced closer to Earth, humans focused on using their knowledge of the solar system to their advantage. They set traps in asteroid fields, forcing the Gornoth fleet to navigate dangerous terrain where their large, bulky ships struggled. Meanwhile, Earth's defenses remained hidden, with only small squadrons appearing at critical moments to strike before quickly retreating. It became clear to the Gornoth that humanity was not going to engage in the kind of fight they wanted. Instead, humans played a waiting game, biding their time, letting frustration build within the Gornoth ranks. Psychological warfare became one of humanity's most effective tools. The Gornoth, proud and arrogant, were unaccustomed to being outmaneuvered. They were used to brute strength winning the day. But as their warships were picked off one by one in seemingly random ambushes, their confidence began to waver. Misinformation spread through their ranks, planted by human intelligence operatives. False reports of hidden human fleets and secret weapons created paranoia among the Gornoth commanders. They began to question their strategy and their own invincibility. On Earth, the general and his team worked tirelessly to anticipate the Gornoth's moves. Using old war strategies from human history, they crafted a defense that drew inspiration from battles fought on Earth long ago. Instead of focusing on direct confrontation, the humans wore down the Gornoth's resources and morale. Every skirmish, every ambush chipped away at the Gornoth's belief in their inevitable victory. As the Gornoth grew more desperate to end the war quickly, they made mistakes. They underestimated the toll that human tactics were taking on their fleet. Their supply lines were stretched thin, and their troops, accustomed to swift victories, were growing tired and demoralized. But still, they pressed forward, determined to land their ground forces on Earth and crush humanity once and for all. Humanity's greatest strength was their ability to think differently. They understood that fighting the Gornoth on their terms would lead to certain defeat. So, they continued to engage in asymmetrical warfare, targeting the Gornoth's weaknesses rather than their strengths. When the Gornoth attempted to regroup and launch a coordinated strike, human forces sabotaged their efforts, cutting off their ability to communicate effectively across the vastness of space. The humans also began to exploit the Gornath's honor-driven culture. The Gornath, valuing strength above all, had a rigid code that made them predictable in battle. Humans, on the other hand, were pragmatic and willing to bend the rules of war if it meant survival. They used decoys, false surrenders, and unconventional tactics that threw the Gornath off balance. What the Gornath saw as dishonorable, the humans saw as necessary. The Gornath commanders, furious at what they perceived as cowardly tactics, became more reckless in their pursuit of victory. As the Gornath fleet neared Earth, they were met with a final series of coordinated strikes. Human forces had calculated the timing of their attacks to coincide with moments of weakness in the Gornath's movements. Just as the Gornath believed they were closing in for the kill, their fleet was ambushed by human forces who had been lying in wait. The Gornath, caught off guard by the precision and timing of the attack, suffered heavy losses. The turning point came when the Gornath attempted to launch a full-scale assault on Earth's surface. They expected the ground battle to be swift and decisive, but what awaited them was anything but. Humanity had turned Earth itself into a fortress. They had studied the terrain, the weather patterns, and the environment, using them to their advantage. When the Gornath landed their ground troops, they were met not with open fields of battle, but with guerrilla tactics that used Earth's geography against them. The Gornath, accustomed to fighting in open spaces where they could leverage their size and strength, struggled in the dense forests, mountains, and urban environments of Earth. Human resistance was fierce, but it wasn't brute force that won the day. It was strategy. The humans knew when to fight and when to retreat. They didn't waste resources on battles they couldn't win but instead focused on exhausting the Gornath forces, drawing them deeper into traps and ambushes. The Gornath, unable to adapt to the humans' unpredictable tactics, began to falter. Their pride had led them into a conflict they were unprepared for, and now they were paying the price. Despite their best efforts, the Gornath found themselves bogged down in a war of attrition, something they had never experienced before. They had expected to dominate quickly, but the longer the conflict dragged on, the more their weaknesses were exposed. Human resilience, their ability to adapt and outthink their enemy, became the Gornath's undoing. Each loss, each setback, eroded their once unshakable confidence. By the time the Gornath realized they had underestimated humanity, it was too late. Their forces, depleted and demoralized, were forced to retreat. The Gornath, who had begun the war with the belief that they were invincible, had learned a harsh lesson. Humanity had shown them that strength alone wasn't enough to win a war. The Gornath had relied on their power and size for too long, while humanity had relied on something far more valuable, their ability to survive against all odds. The Gornath had underestimated humanity's capacity to endure and adapt. With every skirmish, every ambush, they became more aware that brute strength alone would not be enough to win this war. The humans were different from any enemy they had faced. Where others broke under the weight of the Gornath's overwhelming force, the humans seemed to grow stronger, more determined. They fought not just with weapons but with their minds, turning every weakness into an opportunity. The human general, a man who had studied warfare in all its forms, knew that this would not be a war of attrition. He had seen too many civilizations fall to the Gornath by trying to meet them on their terms. Instead, he took a different approach, one inspired by Earth's long history of conflict. Humanity had fought countless wars throughout its existence, and while the scale of those wars paled in comparison to a galactic conflict, the lessons learned from them remained relevant. Humans had survived against greater numbers, more advanced enemies, and overwhelming odds before. This was just another chapter in that long history. Drawing from the past, the general and his team began to devise strategies rooted in the very essence of human resilience. They turned to the guerrilla tactics that had proven so effective in wars like Vietnam, where smaller, less equipped forces had worn down a more powerful enemy through unconventional means. The humans took advantage of every inch of their planet's terrain, creating a battlefield where the Gornath's size and strength would become liabilities. Earth's dense forests, jagged mountains, and vast urban landscapes became traps for the Gornath ground troops, who were used to more straightforward, open engagements. But more than just tactics, the humans leaned on their knowledge of history. They remembered how empires had fallen because they stretched themselves too thin, because they grew overconfident, and because they failed to adapt. The Gornoth were making those very mistakes, assuming that sheer force and their legacy of conquest would be enough to guarantee victory. They didn't account for the humans' ability to learn and adapt quickly, to exploit every mistake, and to use the Gornoth's own arrogance against them. As the Gornoth continued their assault, humanity revealed its greatest weapon: unpredictability. The Gornoth had grown accustomed to predictable patterns of resistance from their previous conquests, but the humans offered none of that. One moment they would retreat, luring the Gornoth into what appeared to be a weak position, only to strike back when the Gornoth were overextended. The Gornoth began to second-guess their every move, unsure whether they were walking into another trap. Every advance was met with resistance they hadn't anticipated. The humans' ability to think several steps ahead became their most dangerous asset. They anticipated where the Gornoth would strike and prepared accordingly, setting traps and ambushes that inflicted heavy losses. The Gornoth, who were used to overwhelming their opponents with sheer numbers and brute strength, found themselves bogged down in a series of battles where victory seemed to slip further from their grasp with each passing day. The Gornoth, though physically superior, lacked the flexibility and ingenuity that had defined humanity's survival for millennia. While they relied on rigid strategies and brute force, the humans adapted to the circumstances, evolving their tactics with every skirmish. The Gornoth, bound by their code of honor and their need to dominate through raw power, found themselves at a loss when faced with an enemy who refused to fight on their terms. As the conflict dragged on, the Gornoth's once unstoppable war machine began to falter. Their supply lines, stretched thin by humanity's relentless hit-and-run tactics, became vulnerable. What had started as a confident march toward victory became a desperate struggle to maintain their foothold. The Gornoth commanders, who had never faced such a resilient opponent, were forced to reconsider their strategy. But the humans were not done. They knew that this was their moment, that they had the opportunity to turn the tide of the war once and for all. The general ordered a series of coordinated strikes that would hit the Gornoth at their weakest points. These attacks were timed to perfection, catching the Gornoth off guard and inflicting massive losses on their fleet and ground forces. One of the most critical strikes occurred when the Gornoth attempted to land their main invasion force on Earth. They had assumed that once their troops were on the ground, the fight would be over. But the humans had anticipated this move and prepared accordingly. The Gornoth found themselves facing not only human soldiers but also a planet that had been turned into a fortress. Earth's natural defenses, combined with the humans' strategic use of guerrilla tactics, made it nearly impossible for the Gornoth to gain any meaningful ground. What the Gornoth had failed to understand was that humans were fighting for their very survival. For them, defeat was not an option. The Gornoth were used to conquering civilizations that eventually bent the knee, but the humans would not. Every inch of land the Gornoth attempted to take was fiercely contested. They were not fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting for their existence, and that made them far more dangerous than the Gornoth had anticipated. As the Gornoth forces were gradually worn down, their commanders grew desperate. They threw more troops into the battle, hoping to overwhelm the humans through sheer numbers, but it was too late. The humans had learned too much, adapted too well. The Gornoth's tactics, which had been so effective against other species, were no longer enough to secure victory. The turning point came when the Gornoth finally realized that they were not fighting a conventional war. This was a conflict that required more than just force. It required adaptability, creativity, and a willingness to embrace new strategies. But by the time they understood this, the damage had been done. Their fleet, once the terror of the galaxy, was in disarray. Their ground troops, unable to cope with the humans' unconventional tactics, were retreating in disarray. The Gornoth commanders, who had once believed in their own invincibility, were now faced with the harsh reality that they had been outmaneuvered at every turn. Humanity, through its resilience and ingenuity, had taught them a lesson they would never forget. This was not a war they could win with brute force alone. They had underestimated the humans, and now they were paying the price. The final blow came when the Gornoth were forced to retreat from Earth entirely. Their forces, depleted and demoralized, could no longer sustain the fight. The humans, having fought with everything they had, stood victorious, not because they were stronger, but because they were smarter. The Gornoth had learned the hard way that strength without strategy is nothing more than a liability. As the Gornoth fleet limped away from Earth, they carried with them the memory of a war they had never expected to lose. The galaxy was stunned. The news of the Gornoth's retreat from Earth spread rapidly, and with it came a shift in perception. No one had ever imagined that the Gornoth, the most feared and dominant force in the galaxy, could be defeated. Yet, here they were, licking their wounds after a battle with a species they had arrogantly dismissed as insignificant. Other civilizations, who had long lived in fear of the Gornoth's unstoppable war machine, began to reconsider their own standings. The balance of power in the galaxy had changed. For the Gornoth, the defeat was more than just a military loss. It was a shattering blow to their identity. They had built their entire existence around the belief that they were invincible, that their strength and dominance would forever go unchallenged. But now, that illusion had been broken. The Council of Warlords convened in the aftermath of their retreat, the weight of their failure heavy on their shoulders. They were forced to face a reality they had never considered, that they were not the supreme rulers of the galaxy. The defeat at the hands of humanity forced the Gornoth to re-examine their tactics, their strategies, and most painfully, their assumptions about their own superiority. They had never truly understood what they were up against. The humans, with their seemingly inferior technology and physical limitations, had outmaneuvered and outwitted them at every turn. The Gornoth were now left to grapple with the fact that raw power wasn't enough. Strength alone didn't win wars. It was the mind behind the strategy that mattered. On Earth, the mood was one of both relief and reflection. The victory had come at a cost, but it had also proven something vital about the nature of humanity. The general and his team, now regarded as heroes, understood the gravity of what had been achieved. Humanity had not just defended itself, it had altered the course of galactic history. Earth was no longer a peripheral planet. Humanity had earned a place among the great powers of the galaxy, not through diplomacy or technological advancement, but through sheer resilience and strategic brilliance. The general, ever pragmatic, didn't bask in the glory of the victory for long. He knew that the Gornoth would not forget this defeat easily. They would regroup, reassess, and eventually return, likely more prepared and less arrogant than before. The victory had bought humanity time, but it wasn't the end of the conflict. Earth's leaders began to strengthen their defenses, improve their technologies, and forge new alliances. They knew that in the aftermath of this war, they were no longer just defending themselves from the Gornoth. Other species, once content to ignore Earth, would now see humanity as a potential threat or ally. As for the Gornoth, their society was thrown into disarray. The defeat on Earth exposed deep flaws in their once unchallenged supremacy. Their leadership, once unquestioned, now faced scrutiny from within. The lower ranks of their military began to whisper of incompetence at the highest levels. Some even questioned the long-held belief that the Gornoth were destined to rule the galaxy. The cracks in their society, once hidden beneath the surface, began to widen. Despite the loss, the Gornoth were not a species to give up easily. Their pride and culture of war would not allow them to simply fade into the background. The Council of Warlords knew that they had to change, adapt, if they were to regain their status. The defeat by humanity had shown them that they had grown too reliant on brute force. They needed new strategies, new tactics, and most of all, a deeper understanding of their enemies. Back on Earth, humanity had no illusions about the Gornoth's long-term intentions. They knew that this was not the last they would see of their formidable enemy. But this time, they would be ready. The Gornoth had taught them a valuable lesson as well. Victory in war wasn't just about winning a single battle. It was about staying ahead, anticipating the next move, and always being prepared for what came next. Earth's leaders began to build upon the success of their defense, ensuring that when the Gornoth returned, they would face an even stronger and more resilient human race. In the broader galaxy, the The ripple effects of the Gornath's defeat were felt far and wide. Civilizations that had lived under the shadow of Gornath domination began to reconsider their own futures. For the first time in centuries, there was hope that the Gornath could be challenged. Some species, emboldened by humanity's victory, began to resist the Gornath's influence in their regions. Others sought alliances with Earth, recognizing that humanity's strategic genius could be a valuable asset in a shifting galactic landscape. Humanity, for its part, approached these new alliances cautiously. Earth's leaders were keenly aware that while they had won this battle, they were still a relatively young species on the galactic stage. They couldn't afford to overextend themselves. The general and his team remained focused on strengthening Earth's defenses and ensuring that humanity's newfound place in the galaxy was secured for the long term. For the Gornath, the retreat from Earth marked the beginning of a long and painful period of self-reflection. They had believed themselves to be unbeatable, but humanity had shown them otherwise. Their leadership began to implement changes, revisiting their war strategies, and incorporating the lessons they had learned from their defeat. They would not return to Earth the same way they had left it. The next time, they would be smarter, more cautious, and far less arrogant. But humanity, too, was evolving. They had tasted victory, and it had given them the confidence to push forward. Earth was no longer content to be a passive player in the galaxy. The defeat of the Gornath had proven that even the strongest could fall, and that knowledge had empowered them. They would be ready for whatever came next. In the end, both humanity and the Gornath were changed by the war. The Gornath had learned that they were not invincible, and humanity had learned that they were far more powerful than they had ever imagined. The galaxy, once ruled by fear of the Gornath, now had a new player on the field, one that had shown the universe that survival was not about strength alone. It was about adaptability, resilience, and the ability to learn from the past. As the Gornath retreated, they left behind a galaxy forever altered. The humans, once considered a minor species, had taught them a lesson in history they would never forget. The Gornath's supremacy had been broken, and with it, the galaxy's future had been rewritten.